The NBA is constantly changing, teams improving through new pickups, trades, and drafting, while others may get worse, having to deal with injury problems, players maybe not developing as they should, and signing bad contracts. This creates an environment where the standings are always changing season to season, and a team that might not have been as big of a threat can become a serious contender literally overnight. With that in mind, there's one team that somehow, no matter what happens, manages to stay competitive: the San Antonio Spurs. Few franchises in all of sports, let alone basketball, carry a similar reputation as the Spurs, that you can never count out San Antonio. It's always something as NBA fans we've almost come to just expect, that despite whatever happens, they'll find a way to make it to the playoffs, having not missed the playoffs since the 96-97 season, all of Tim Duncan's career and past that. With Tony Parker officially signing with the Charlotte Hornets and Manu Ginobili finally retiring, an era of basketball is officially coming to a close. Even if you weren't a fan of the Spurs or maybe even dreaded having to go up against them in the postseason, seeing their long-lasting core of Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker, coached together by Greg Popovich, come to an end is like a weird sign of the times changing. I'm Mac Pinko, and I wanted to take a look at the three players and coach that helped to make the Spurs so good for all these years, and some of the young players that they've essentially given the keys to the organization, leaving them in charge of the fate of the franchise, to see if San Antonio can stay the threat the NBA has always known it to be. It was in 1997 that the Spurs would draft their future franchise player Tim Duncan with the first overall pick of the draft. Duncan was an exception to the one-and-done rule that a lot of professional players stick to, staying all 4 years at Wake Forest University, keeping a promise to his late mother to graduate from college with a degree. Tim was that kind of a generational talent that comes along so rarely, and it's hard to exactly point out what he excelled at because for the time and position, he was practically great at everything on both the defensive end and offensive end. Rebounding, passing, scoring, blocking, his footwork, strength, and it was all from day one. From the time he stepped foot on an NBA court, he was nothing short of unstoppable. And paired with Hall of Famer center David Robinson, the Spurs had immediately formed one of the two best front court combos to play the game, and were affectionately nicknamed the Twin Towers for their near limitless defensive abilities. Tim was a monster in the post. Utilizing his 6'11" frame and power, he could bully down low, but that was far from all he could do. It wasn't like size was all he had and he just abused it. He was legitimately skilled at basketball, using great footwork and body control to spin and duck by, just generally finding ways to get to the rim, combined with what I can only call a natural feel for getting the ball in the basket. With a variety of ways to shoot from the mid-range like hooks and bank shots, his favorite ways to score were turnaround post-up jumpers, bank shots, and one-handed dunks. With great hands for catching the ball combined with his basketball IQ and offensive talent, he was always an option in the paint. And with his own impressive passing skills for a power forward, dishing it to an open man was always another tool in his arsenal. Duncan was a freakishly good rebounder, coming from a combination of his overall size, strength, and just overall feel for rebounding, which is something that can't necessarily be taught, just coming from experience and instincts on the court. For an example of his rebounding, in his second road game of his career against Dennis Rodman, arguably one of the best rebounders of all time, playing for the Chicago Bulls, Tim managed to grab 22 boards. His game wasn't necessarily unpredictable or fancy. If anything, it was almost kind of simple. But in a way, I think that's what made it so effective. Teams knew what he was going to do, he was just really difficult to stop, no matter how much game planning you did for it. I'm really not doing him the justice he probably deserves, but suffice to say, Tim was really that good, averaging 21.1 points, 11.9 rebounds, 2.7 assists, and 2.5 blocks his rookie season. Winning Rookie of the Year, he set the standard for what he was going to bring to the team the rest of his career from the beginning. It was the next season, in 1999, where two things would happen that would significantly impact the Spurs as a franchise. First, they would go on to win the championship that year, practically sweeping both the West and the Finals, losing only 2 games that postseason, giving Tim, David Robinson, and Greg Popovich their first championships. The second major thing to happen to the Spurs would come about later that summer, where they would go on to draft guard Manu Ginobili with the 57th pick of the draft, although nobody would fully realize the impact of this decision until Ginobili made his way over to the NBA a few years later. The next 2 seasons went well, San Antonio making it to the playoffs, but not out of the West. But 2001 was the year the Spurs would go on to make arguably one of the biggest steals of that draft, taking Tony Parker with the 28th pick of the first round. Tony Parker came to the NBA straight from the French League, choosing to play overseas instead of attending a college or playing for the NCAA, and would join Tim Duncan as the next major piece of the Spurs. Standing at 6'2", Tony was a pure athlete in every sense of the word. He was explosive with a quick first step and could almost perfectly control his pace at will, being able to speed up or slow down on command to match the situation. Alongside his footwork and body control, he was the perfect slasher, able to cut through and split NBA defenses on a new level. Excellent ball control and handles allowed him to catch defenders off guard with a crossover in tandem with his overall quickness. If players have what you could consider a signature move, spinning was Tony's. His ability to drive, get to the rim, and then spin by the defenders separated him from other players of the position. His feel for the game and court vision combined with decent enough shooting made him almost the perfect player for the Spurs system. He was a little more unpredictable than Tim. He could drive then finish with a ton of creative moves at the basket, different layups, floaters, weird hook shots, or even just pull up for a mid-range jumper. And with his passing, he was a threat in most ways imaginable. Passing is a definite strength of his and could honestly really range from straightforward passes to an open man to some insane no-look dimes or threading the needle between a team's defense to someone at the basket. He even had enough of a three-point shot that it wouldn't always be best to dare him to shoot it. While I wouldn't call him a lockdown defender by any means, he was a good enough defender. It just came from his overall feel for the court and his quickness. Tony was good his first year in the league, making the NBA all-rookie first team and adjusted well to the pace of the NBA, something that tends to give a lot of European players some trouble initially. They went on to lose in the playoffs to a Lakers team led by a young Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, but Tim Duncan won his first MVP award. That season, he averaged 9.2 points and 4.3 assists. It was the following season where it would all come together, not only for Tony, but for the Spurs, launching what could be considered a dynasty for the next several years. It was the 2002-03 season. Manu had finally made his way to the NBA, and at 37 years old, it was looking like the Twin Towers might come to an end soon, with David Robinson's retirement in sight. For a little about Ginobili's game and what makes him so good, Manu is kind of like an NBA coach's dream. He is just a well-rounded shooting guard. It really doesn't make sense, and he could just slide into almost any roster in the league effortlessly. At 6'6", he was both quick and explosive, able to just blow by defenders, and with his leaping ability he could get enough air to slam it down. But he could also shoot from deep on a good percentage, 36.9% for his career. His passing was incredible, consistently making passes that even today are still mind-blowing to me. Rebounding was great for a two-guard, got steals regularly, could finish at the basket with dunks, floaters, layups, every way to get the ball in the basket imaginable. His handles and overall dribbling were tight, and he was a good enough defender, always willing to take a charge, forcing teams to make an extra pass or just generally be more cautious. But San Antonio's defense was so strong, and getting to play with one of the best defensive big men in Tim Duncan, he didn't need to be a great defensive player by any means. The funny thing about Manu is that he's insanely clutch. He could always make the play that the other team and fans of those teams didn't want him to make. Game winners, blocks, buzzer beaters, he never shied away from big moments. As a Rockets fan, watching him get that clean strip block on James Harden in overtime still kills me. Manu obviously had a great feel for the game and just understood basketball. And if it feels like I'm either glossing over him or talking him up too much, I'm not trying to. It's just he was such a jack-of-all-trades type of player that it's almost just easier to look at the few areas he was lacking. The biggest probably being he liked to take risks, which is more like a double-edged sword. He would gamble, reaching in for a steal which could potentially backfire, or try to make a bad shot and miss, setting the team back. With the addition of Ginobili, the core of Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili was formed, and the Spurs would start a dynasty, proving to be a constant contender for the NBA championship. The Spurs always had role players along the way too, like Bruce Bowen, Danny Green, Marco Bellinelli, and Matt Bonner, but without a doubt, it was Tim, Manu, and Tony who were always the center points of the team. San Antonio would go on to win the 03 championship, with Tim winning both his second MVP and Finals MVP, and Greg Popovich winning Coach of the Year. The team went on to win 2 more championships in 2005 and 07, and would stay relevant in the next 6 seasons, battling in the playoffs and almost winning the 2013 championship, losing Game 7 to the then monster team Miami Heat, led by LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade. It was in 2014 where San Antonio would do what they couldn't the year before, and beat the Heatles by Game 5, giving Tim Duncan his 5th championship and Greg Popovich his 3rd Coach of the Year award. At this point, Manu, Tim, and Tony were starting to get older, and with a noticeable loss of step, Tim Duncan being 37 and Ginobili 36, so a lot of this championship can be attributed to Kawhi Leonard really coming into his own during the series, averaging 17.8 points per game with a 3-point percentage of 58.3% on 3.8 attempts per game, and defense that would really define him as a player. This is the point where the core would slightly unravel for San Antonio. After 2 more years of getting knocked out of the playoffs, Tim would go on to retire in 2016, kind of marking the beginning of the end of an era of Spurs basketball. Tony would go on to sign with the Charlotte Hornets in 2018, and Manu, as of right now, has officially retired. This is something that is kind of inescapable. Time moves on, players get older and retire, or maybe even only leave a team. Players that had such an effect for so long that when they leave, in a strange way it almost feels like a different sport. Because it's been so long, it's hard to imagine a league or even a team without them. Kind of like when Kobe retired, or eventually when LeBron leaves the league. And I'm not saying that Manu or Tony Parker are the players that Kobe or LeBron are by a wide margin, but the impact they had on the league, while maybe not as great, was no less real, especially for fans of San Antonio who practically grew up with these guys. Even if you weren't rooting for these players, if anything, maybe rooting against them. You get so used to playing them year in and year out that it's almost weird when they're gone. With the times changing so drastically, who's there to take the reins and lead the next generation of the San Antonio Spurs? DeMar DeRozan is without a doubt going to be the focal point of the team. Along with LaMarcus Aldridge, these two are most likely going to be the biggest players on the team for the next 1 to 2 years, while the younger guys develop, who are then probably going to carry more weight in the future. Both players are mid-range experts, with DeMar also being an athletic monster and LMA controlling the post with turnaround jumpers. Coach Popovich decided last year to give DeJounte Murray the starting point guard position, and while both young and a work in progress, you can definitely see that the talent is there, especially on the defensive end. He's long, quick, has great handles, and a particularly soft touch, really utilizing his tool of choice, a floater. As of right now, he's more of a project, but in time he looks like he could be the point guard of the future, picking up where Tony Parker left off. The shooting guard from the University of Miami, Lonnie Walker, also looks really promising, with a ridiculously high ceiling for how good he can be. Athletic with a beautiful shot form, he has all the tools to make an impression pretty quickly, especially if he can manage to get minutes. Which leads to some of the big men San Antonio has on the roster, starting with the Latvian laser Davis Bertans. Davis has a shot that's as pure as driven snow with a quick release, and at 6'10", seeming like he can develop into a great stretch 4 in the league, shooting 38.4% from 3 for his career. He's surprisingly athletic and a good passer, combined with improving effort on the defensive end. He's progressing really well, and although his poor rebounding numbers are cited against him, I think that's in part due to the fact that he's primarily used to spread the floor. Acquired in the trade with DeMar, Jakob Poeltl is a perfect center for the Spurs system. He's a defensively minded big man who's deceptively quick on his feet, with good hands for catching lobs and inside passes for some easy dunks and a knack for blocks. With Greg Popovich coaching, I have no doubt that not only will a lot of these young players improve, but backed up by some good role players and scoring threats like Marco Bellinelli, Patty Mills, and Rudy Gay, this roster can continue making the playoffs for the foreseeable future. While probably not the championship contender they used to be, San Antonio is being left in good hands, and though one era of not only Spurs basketball, but NBA basketball is coming to a close, who knows, maybe this could be the start of a new generation in the league. And as we got used to the players who made the NBA so fun to watch, such a nightmare to play against, and a challenge to overcome, we'll get used to these players who can do it all over again. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Like always, if you guys disagree with anything I said or have a different opinion, please write about it in the comment section. I love reading what you guys think. And if you have a player or a team you'd like to see me talk about and do some research on, also let me know about that. Again, thank you guys so much for watching and all the support, and I'll see you next time.